Do you ever find yourself searching for more balance in your career, your business, or maybe just your life? Well, my guest today is busting the myth of balance and sharing what we should be focusing on instead. Kareen Walsh is an author, podcast host, and the CEO of Revampologist. Her incredible career encompasses nearly 2 decades of entrepreneurial and executive experience, leading and advising companies of all sizes. As a seasoned startup advisor, Kareen loves to help people align with the personal core values that allow them to thrive in the life that they design. Welcome back to the podcast. I have a true powerhouse joining me today. I mean, they really all are. And then there's those women who you're like, whoa, this is like a serious powerhouse. I will never forget meeting Kareen in our mastermind. We're both in a mastermind together, her and her husband, and then me and my husband are all in it. And it was the first weekend that we got together in January that I got to meet all these incredible entrepreneurs and all these incredible women who are seriously doing badass things in the business world. And Kareen, you were like one of those people that I was just blown away by your presence upon first meeting you. So I'm super excited to finally get to have you on the podcast.
Oh, Lindsay, it's so excited to be here. I love being able to serve other powerhouse women like yourself. But truly that connection back in January, I was, so excited not only to meet you, but also this platform that you've built and how much you encourage other women to step up into their greatness. It's just so great to connect with you and share with your listeners today.
That's what it's all about, isn't it? I mean, I think more and more, and I know this is how you operate as well, it's this journey where you're going along your path, and then you see these points where you have the opportunity to turn around and impart wisdom on others who are following along in your footsteps, whether on their own journey, but maybe a step or 2 or 10 behind where you're at. And I know that that's really what you have built your entire business on, is just that philosophy of mentorship, really.
Yeah, the paying it forward moments for sure.
Yes. Okay, so there's so much that I want to have you share about, but first I really want to hear about you. For our listeners who don't know you, maybe they don't listen to your amazing podcast, at least not yet. They will after hearing this. Why don't you take us back? What really inspired your journey, and how did you get to the point where you are today? I know that's kind of like a loaded question. So whatever you want to share in terms of really the journey that's brought you to the place you are right now.
Yeah, I mean, 45 years on this planet is going to be hard to to give you.
This will be a 4-part podcast,
snippet, but I think I could do it. And truly, because I believe, it is really the culmination of who we choose to be today is our journey that we've gone through. So, for me, grew up on the East Coast. I'm a first generation Lebanese American, so it's like I had parents that weren't from here. So I had that dynamic growing up of ancestry and a culture that is so dynamic and so embedded in their ways of how we greet people and entertain and party, as well as the business acumen and, how can you help each other out? And I think that energy growing up with a father who was entrepreneurial, a mother who was very disciplined around get education, your education matters, and then it'll help you in the workforce. Just that dynamic of the two really started to instill in me at a young age the mastery of achievement, let's call it. Although I didn't really fit well into anyone's box either. Like I wasn't really good at multiple choice tests or how to match up against how people were scoring things. So I think I had more of I do have a high IQ, but I had a higher EQ from a younger age. And I think that's what I've leveraged through my journey is building connections, When I want to go after something, I go after it. And then if I could show other people how to get out of their own way, because I had to get out of my own way to do it. So from a tactful standpoint, my career first started as an executive or growing into an executive of a software company in my 20s. And I lived in San Francisco. And I then decided on the cusp of 30 that I was done with that journey because I had kind of reached the maximum level of growth I wanted within that firm. I was senior director of mergers and acquisitions, managing a lot at the age of 29, 30. And when I looked at the people above me, I was like, I really don't want to be them. So, felt like I think it's time for me to leave. And I'd been in that company for about 5 years. So I decided to resign and move to Colorado from San Francisco because one of the companies we acquired was in Denver and I lived there for a while. So I was like, let me go back there and slow down. Prior to that, I was between Manhattan and San Francisco managing this operation and the different acquisitions of the company had through headquarters. And I decided, you know what, let me just move to Denver and figure myself out. I didn't have a strong relationship in my life. I didn't have the best health either. And I really wanted to kind of put career accomplishments as my guiding force into how can I really blossom and bloom in the other areas of my life that are important. So when I moved to Denver, I had bought a house while I was still employed and made sure that that house was about 1/4 of my income, like of what I potential of earning, because I had no idea how I was going to earn money. So it was like all this risk taking, but I was like, I know I'm going to need a roof over my head. Might as well buy a place. And back then, Denver was way more affordable than it is today. And then I just started to explore what it would be like to work out there in order to give myself that time freedom I was looking for. And I decided to go into contract work and basically as a self-employed person versus employment. And that was my first itch or first, the itch that I scratched in regards to like, what does entrepreneurship or like working for myself, could that feel like? And I felt like that was the lowest level of risk I could take was selling my time for money. Right. So I just was contracting at the time and it was very lucrative. I found that being a contractor with the skills I had from being, a senior person in a software company, how I could sell myself for contracts and manage relationships in Denver when I first moved there, it turned into a 5.5 years of working for myself and kept climbing like what I chose to do, but I'd never worked more than about 35 hours a week. And I was earning twice as much, the same amount that I was earning in San Francisco as an executive, I was earning doing contract work. And I had this whole theory of minimal effort, maximum reward during that time. And then I started to focus on my health. Like it actually gave me the time to look internally, which is why I think my practice today and what I do today always has more of a holistic view with my clients, because I know how important it is to work from the inside out when it comes to your career life or your business life, that I make sure it's always incorporated in all my conversations as well as my engagement with my clients. It's not just about the transaction of work. It's about who are you? What do you want to see happen? And how can I help you get there from the inside out?
And I love that you bring up that holistic approach. I'm speaking from personal experience here. Sometimes there's not a holistic view to my life when I'm really in a season of working on a business project or whatever it may be. So we'll definitely have to circle back to that, because I think that as women now, especially balancing so many different things, this word balance almost tends to get over glorified when I'd love to hear, I guess maybe we don't need to circle back to it. Let's just dive right in.
Dive right in. Because that word you just said, balance.
Right. Tell me
your trigger word.
I was going to say, it's like this magical unicorn that
Yeah, but it
lives
doesn't exist,
in a
actually.
land
Yeah,
that
completely.
no one has found. So, how do you approach? I think when we say we're looking for balance between work, family life, time management, what is it that we're actually seeking, and how instead should we approach that?
Yeah, so I always one of my talks I do is there's no such thing as balance, because balance means you're trading something off
Mm.
to achieve something else. But then that trade-off is going to leave a gap in fulfillment in the way my
Yeah.
perspective is on it, right? Like, so you can't trade off, I can't be with my kids because I'm going to have to work. And then, if I work, then my kids suffer like all this guilt stuff that goes back and forth because you think you have to trade one thing off for another. What I love to focus on is integration. I use the word work-life integration versus work-life balance, because the integration is you. If you can think more holistically about how you show up in all that you do and become more aligned in your own self-mastery of who you are and how you want to show up in it, that integrative energy goes way further than trying to struggle to balance something that is never in balance. Like, why should it be in balance? Like, it's a farce. It was a word that was used when, as a marketing ploy, when we started to develop HR departments of companies to say, in order to help our employees have more of a work-life balance, it was marketing. It was not something that actually had a realistic goal against it, right? So if you want something to
Wow.
lean into, it's integration. How can you integrate what you love, who you are, how you want to show up in the world with everything you do? Then you will completely let go of that desire for balance. And it's more about leaning into alignment and integrative action in order to really achieve that level of fulfillment that we look for.
Yeah. Okay. I've never heard it phrased that way. I love your word integration. And I'm gonna peel back the layers a little further and get you to give us like a real life example, because I'm watching right now a lot of women in my life and my community are either they're building businesses or building a home. They're full-time at home or in a career. And now they're also possibly in a position where they're homeschooling their kids. They have health and fitness goals. They have a partnership or a marriage that they want to pour time into. So, how does that look in those moments when I'm like, I only have so much to give? And one of these areas, it feels like I still am in that tug of war of something has to be sacrificed in order for me to have XYZ result. How does that look in reality in our lives? Like, let's use
Yeah.
that as an example.
Well, I think in reality, what you're constantly doing is making priority calls in that moment.
Yeah.
And what exhausts people is when they're not truly taking into account what they really desire. Because the have to, like that have to story, like I have to do this, I have to do that. Yes, we live in obligatory relationships with our kids, with our spouses, like our life partners, whatever that looks like. You could make it more disciplined on how you choose to show up in that obligation and find the way for it to be more fulfilling. So, what does that look like? What I mean by that is, I always coach my clients and teams, and I even put a guide out for work-life integration now that everyone's from, at home, and it's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
now I used to be able to close the door and go to work and not think about home.
Mhm.
Now I'm home, having to work and think about the home, like holy overwhelm, because we were not prepared for this, right? But
Yeah.
now we've been sitting in like 5 months of it. 5 months, 3 months started to create a new habit and behavior of how you show up in it all. A lot of people teetered out and just gave up. They either gave up on homeschooling, or maybe they lost their job or had to let go of their job to manage what was going on at home. There were trade-offs happening because you couldn't find the integrated moment because no one talked to you about how the hell do we integrate all of this. So the first step is to define what is your code of conduct to show up in this now integrated life for your goals. So for example, if you want everyone to be excited about being home, working together, going to school together, playing together, whatever that looks like. You need to all sit down and talk about what a highly functional arena at home could look like. So for you to explain to your kids, look, I need to work from these hours in order for us to have what we need to provide for us during this time. This is what work looks like for me. We assume all the time, Lindsay, that everyone knows what the hell we're dealing with in our head. And if we don't
Gosh.
take the time to map it out with those we care about, or even our teams, even if you have a small business and you have a team, or a large business and with a remote team, if you don't set that code of conduct of how you're going to show up for each other, with each other, when you need your alone time, how to operate, it's going to be chaos. And you're going to feel like you're always failing at something because you never talked about the struggle together to find a solution together. And people will step in. They will step in and assist if you are clear about your ask. So that's step number one, is really mapping out your code of conduct. I think it helps tremendously increase overall happiness, performance while you're doing it. You have indicators of how you operate, like, do you wear a certain color or a hat when you're working so your kids don't bother you, right? Or do you make sure that there's a station where this is where work is and then this is where play is? And you just have to be consistent on the discipline around it all, but then tweak it along the way. What did you learn? How can we make it better? And if you're more inclusive around who's around you all the time and who's with you, that will also help you step into it much easier.
I mean, I feel as though just that piece alone about being out loud with what we need, what our pain points are, what we need as far as support. I mean, that alone could radically change my life. I mean, and it's just right now, me and Elliot, it's just two of us, no children to also bring into the conversation, but thinking about it from the standpoint of creating that open space for each person in the family, or this could be in your work environment, in the team, to express what they need and be honest about it. That was the other part that I heard is you started off by saying just really being honest about what's fulfillment for you, and that it's okay if being the primary homeschooler is not actually the picture of fulfillment. It's okay. That doesn't make you a bad mom.
100%
right?
okay. Yeah.
I think maybe someone out there needed to hear that. So I'm just going to go ahead and
Yes, let it
underline that
go.
point.
Delegate it if you can. Yeah. Get one of your friends who are really good at homeschooling to take on your kids if they can. Like, do yes, like give yourself permission to really, really declare what lifts you up and what you excel at, because then you're allowing space for the others who excel in the areas that you don't to step in. We put so much pressure on ourselves as women because we were trained that way. We were trained, especially at the beginning of the feminist movement, that we had to do it all. We had to do it exactly like a man would in order to be accepted into everything. So not only did we learn what happens in the household, how to raise a household, how to raise children, how to take care of ourselves, but we also had to learn how to go run that business, do that business, bring home the money. And then it became this overwhelm of like demand on choice, when actually we were exposed to so many amazing things that now we get to choose what do we want to be amazing at. I would be a shitty ass homeschool teacher, Lindsay. I do not have the patience.
Preach.
I can coach and train and work with adults and spar, at a certain age level. But if I had to sit and make sure that my young child, which I don't have any children, but I know for a fact it would drive me nuts, I would have totally had to figure out another way so that I could keep my sanity through all of this. Yeah. And it would have been okay with me, because why would I suffer in something I suck at versus becoming the person I want to be and going and thriving in that arena and bringing that energy to the people I love.
I'm like, take me to church. It's so necessary. And I'm sure if those of you listening are anything like me, it's very much so easier said than done. And sometimes it does feel uncomfortable to accept support in an area. I still feel this way when my house is being cleaned by someone else. It's so silly. And yet, like, I get to support another woman in her business. And yet I have that little piece of me that's like, but my mom cleaned the house and she still does to this day, you know, and I just notice, and I have to set aside when it shows back up those conversations that were adopted from somewhere else or from expectations I placed on myself or others placed on me. So thanks for giving us all that permission. That's
and
so
also to tell
beautiful.
yourself, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
I repeat that constantly in my practice with my clients and like to myself. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Like, we should all over ourselves. And that's a whole nother layer of stress that doesn't serve us. Like, for what reason? Why should you? Why? Like, who said? You're an adult now. I loved becoming an adult because that made the ability for me to choose how I spend my time.
Yeah.
We got to choose wisely for yourself, obviously. But if you're shooting all over yourself and you're showing up as a version of yourself that isn't true to who you really want to be, that's when illness happens. That's when breakups happen. That's when you start to lose things. You don't realize why you're losing them because you're showing up in a life that's not even meant for you. Because you're shooting all over yourself. So it's
stop
really
shooting
important.
On yourself.
Stop
friends.
shooting. Yeah. Right. And just stand in the power. I mean, this is Powerhouse women, right? Stand in that power of what you feel called to do. And even if you don't know how you're going to do that yet, just declare it. Because when you can declare it, all the how shows up. Like, it just shows up because you're clear.
And this conversation really evolves into the other thing that I know you are a master at. And you mentioned it in the beginning, is helping leaders get out of the way and really lead from the place of leveraging their strengths, creating the teams and the other systems in order to allow their business, their vision to scale to the level it's really meant to. I've said from the beginning, and this is why I'm actually always in a mastermind or will always have a mentor, because I know I, as the human being driving this ship, am going to be the only thing that gets in the way of it making the impact it's supposed to make. So how does this whole concept of really being honest, number one, about our position, our place in the business, our strengths, our gifts, everything that comes with that, how do you have that conversation with leaders in business in terms of keeping them out of the way so that the entity that they lead can really scale to the place that it's meant to?
Yeah, I love this question because we all get in our own way all the time. So imagine the way you get in your own way for your own life, and then having the responsibility of driving a team forward in a direction, and all of you getting in your own way. How productive do you think that that end result will be?
Not much.
Right? And then if anyone listening has been a team player or an employee of a poor leadership style, which is more ego driven of it, I'm shooting all over. I should do this. I should do this. I can do this. I should do this. Like, and not giving the empowered space for the other skills in the room to step forward. It is almost, it sometimes can feel like it's minimizing the impact you can have. So you have these whispers in your head, like, I know I could do that too. Why isn't he or she letting me do that? And you start to question it. When you have those moments, it is so critical to step into, especially leaders who are listening, who know they're getting in their own way of the success of their business and or their team, is to ask themselves, what direction do they truly want to go in? And what do they want to be known for? So first step is self-reflection. A lot of the time, leaders don't take enough time to really be self-aware of how they're showing up. So there are methods to do that, where you could either do like 360 reviews and understand, what is the true perception of my team versus how I think I'm showing up. And I guarantee there's a gap. There's the gap between how you think you're showing up and what's really showing up to those you work with. And I have a tool I use with my leaders to get me that data so that I can then coach that gap. And that gap generally is aligned with self-awareness, but also skills learning. a lot of the time people put themselves or have fallen into management and leadership without taking the time to say, how can I be the best at this? What do I need to do to show up in this and make sure I'm aligned with who I am while I'm leading everyone else? And if you can take those steps of developing yourself in that way, that's how you get out of your own way. Because a lot of the times we are shooting all over ourselves again in who we think we're supposed to be as a manager or as a leader of industry. We assume and we stop asking because all of a sudden we've been given this title and we forget how to actually just show up in the work and empower others around us to show up in what they're best at, or even teach them how to do it if they're coming in up under you and needing to learn the skill. So first and foremost, it's self-awareness. And then second, it's the willingness to learn how to get out of your own way and start asking versus assuming you know. That's the fastest way to engage your team is when you're in struggle and you're unsure, is to be vulnerable and say, hey guys, I have no clue, but what I do know is together we can solve this. So let's, run a session and let everyone ideate on how they would solve it. Okay, great. Now who's capable in this room to step in and help us solve it? Like who has the skills to help? Do we not have it? Okay, maybe we need to go find them. But the more collaborative you can be and the more transparent you can be, the faster your team will move forward together.
Okay. So being honest, just the idea of getting that kind of radically honest feedback makes my stomach turn upside down a little bit. So talk to me about when you called it a 360-degree review, right? Yeah. So whether this is, because I was thinking back to even what we were saying about like the household environment, that could be a really powerful exercise to do even within the family. Like how are we showing up versus like how are we actually showing up versus how do we think we are? So what are some of the most powerful questions to be willing to ask in order to get some of that feedback to show us where that gap is?
That's a great question. And I think the quickest one where you won't feel attacked because I think that's
thank you.
I think that's where you might be sweating and your back is kind of like, what is happening right now? Yeah, like a little more deodorant for that moment. But here, I'm dabbing your forehead while we're talking with my towel. Don't sweat. We can get through this. So what I love about this question is truly what you're asking is, how do you assess how well we're doing? And then also figure out where we want to go to next. If you can manage that kind of dialogue and regroup, every so often, especially as a family unit or you with your team, I call it a retrospective exercise. And I actually have a podcast episode I can send you the link to if you want to add to the show notes that walks you through this exercise.
Oh, cool.
Because I found that it's something that when you take the moment, and I'll go through the questions now real quick, but because it's super simple, but if you want to be guided through it, like I did it in an episode on my show so that you could use it anytime you want, right?
Okay,
I'm
cool.
all about sharing the tools to repeat. I think it's also in my Lead with Value book as well, but regardless, the questions are, if you grab a piece of paper and you put a grid on it, on the top left, you first want to check in on what's really going well. So most of the time when we sit into evaluation mode, we think of all the bad things, but you have to capture what's going really well so that you keep doing those things. So you want to check in and say, so if you talked about a family unit, right? Now you're in this work-life integration mode, homeschooling work, and you set up your code of conduct, and maybe about 3 weeks in, you want to check in, or if every week, what's gone really well, guys, in regards to how we're operating at home? And everybody on their own lists out what's going really well, and then you share it together, and you talk it through, and you celebrate what's been going really well that you're going to continue to do. Fantastic. Now, on the bottom left of that page, it's what do we need to stop doing? So out of what we designed and what we've tried to do, what do we need to stop doing? What are the things that maybe aren't going so well that we need to just stop doing? Like, I need you to stop bouncing a ball while I'm on the conference call. Like, that just needs to stop from the hours of 12 to 5 so that I can concentrate on my call. Whatever that looks like, everyone gets to list out the stop doing. And just so you're aware of all the things you need to stop doing. And then the top right corner of that piece of paper is what do you need to start doing? What do we need to start doing in order to make this better, in order to achieve X goal, if it's in your business, in order to release this product, like whatever that looks like, what do you need to start doing to make it better? And then the bottom right corner is pick the top 3 things that you want to focus on from that list, like whether it's stop doing or the start doing. But now you actually have a progress report of something you can step into next. And you all make a decision on what you will commit to doing between this moment and the next time you assess it. And that's like the quickest and most collaborative way to raise awareness on how things are performing, but also how you each can show up in it.
How powerful and truly how simple.
Yeah.
It really is.
I'm all about simple.
Amen to that. So when you pick the 3 that you're going to focus on, do you pick 3 collectively among everyone's feedback, or each person picks their 3?
It is really about how you operate as a group. So sometimes you can only pick 1 because that's all you have capacity for.
Sure.
Right. It's really your decision, your discretion. It could be 1 for each of you and 1 together. Like, it really depends on what was showing up. But I would say is based on that thing, whatever, or top 3 things you pick, then you want to set a goal against it with a by when date so that you're actually seeing the action. You're not just talking about it. You're like, okay, by the next time we meet, we want to see this as a point of measure to achieve that thing, right?
Yeah.
But it can be however you design your team, however you design your structure, if it's individual, if everyone walks away with something they do separately, something together, that's your design. Like, that's the beauty of this exercise.
Oh, okay, cool. I love that. And I'm absolutely going to put that into practice. And for those of you who listen to this and do, I want you to take a screenshot. You don't have to share your answers, but take a screenshot of you doing this exercise with your team or your family and post it on social media, or just send it to us if you want to share it privately.
Love to see it. Yeah, cheer you on.
Really want to see people take this on, because I think that being willing to ask for and deliver that honest feedback, whether it's your team, your family, that truly is how we move forward together as a group, as a team, as a household unit. I think that's so beautiful.
It is, and it's needed. A lot of us sit in resentment and anger with those we love, generally is from a place of non-communication. Yeah. And so coming up with simple tools where everyone's included, their input is included. You're not just being talked at, but you all have a voice in coming together. You need a facilitator. Someone has to facilitate it, but that's why you can use either this episode or go listen to the one where I prompt you through it that lets someone else then facilitate for you. Put pause as you're going through each segment and start the communication, because that makes the biggest difference. And just be open to the answers that people come up with. It's a no judgment zone, and it would be so helpful to move yourselves forward that way.
Okay. I love that so much. I want to ask one kind of final question as we start to wrap this all up, because there are a lot of women, especially our community is mainly women, although there's some awesome dudes who I know listen to the podcast. Shout out to you as well. Yeah. But there's a lot of women right now in this season of change. There's just a lot of change happening, who are waking up to this bigger vision for themselves, a big idea that they're like, you know what? I am finally going to get into action around this idea. And one of the things when we talk about getting in our own way that I see show up a lot for women, and for myself, this has been my own journey, is this idea of imposter syndrome, not enough, who am I to do this? I want to know 2 things. Number 1, you work with some pretty high-level leaders. Does this show up even in really high-level leaders? Because I know that it probably does.
It does, because we were conditioned to think smaller than who we really are. So it shows up in everybody. Everybody has it.
And I want to underline that for a really important reason, because I truly believed at some point that just went away, that I would become successful enough, or maybe I just would feel confident and never feel that way. So I know that that is most likely true. It hasn't gone away for me completely. Every time I go to take on a new goal, it forces me to stretch bigger. But then how do you coach, whether it's an executive or a brand new entrepreneur, how do you coach them to tangibly move through those seasons where imposter syndrome or just insecurity around, am I really meant to do this, shows up?
Yeah. So what I love about this question is that you're asking, how do you help somebody who's telling themselves a story of what's possible and what's not possible before they've even tried? And so as a coach,
girl.
yeah, like literally as a coach, I go back to that moment. It's like, you have to that's great. You have these fears, but what action can we take right now? And even when fear shows up, I'm all about thanking the fear. If you start to thank you, fear, for showing up, you're showing me I'm actually stepping into something bigger this time than what I know already. And great, you just helped me recognize that. Thank you. And still take action anyway. I think the value of having a coach, a mentor, a strategic advisor, whatever you want to call me, is that I'm a sounding board, but I also have helped so many clients in just giving themselves permission because to just step forward into it, regardless of the stories they're telling themselves. And even for me, it shows up, I will say, and just how you described it for yourself, Lindsay, is that it still shows up for you. But what's happening as you jump into action is that you're learning for real what's possible. You're surprising yourself all the time. And that cycle of imposter syndrome or doubt or the fear cycle is shorter because it'll always be there. The way you maximize performance at the level of exec that I work with and the C-suites and the founders, et cetera, is that you shorten that cycle because it's still going to show up, but let's just keep it really short. It doesn't last as long to a point where it debilitates you from moving forward, but we shorten it enough so that you're still moving forward anyway.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I should get that tattooed somewhere, that when we're in that space, we're making a decision about what's possible or not possible before we've even tried.
Yeah. You just have to try.
Mic drop right there. We won't actually drop our microphones because they're, we kind of need them, but that's so brilliant. Okay. Thank you. That's actually a new way that I've heard that whole conversation put. And I know that that's going to really serve a lot of listeners.
Awesome.
So I love that.
Glad.
So
Great.
For those who want to listen to your podcast, read your book, find out more about you and all of the value that you offer, tell me some of the best places for people to find you and connect with you.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it's been so much dialoguing this way. I love talking with you about these topics, but it's so awesome to be part of the Powerhouse tribe. I can be found on Instagram. If you want to see my most playful side, is on Instagram. I would say
we definitely want to see that side.
Yeah, you see all sides of me in my Insta story. I'm fully transparent with a lot of things. So that's at Kareen, Kareen, Z as in zebra, WALSH on Insta. I would love to connect with you even through my site. So that's KareenWalsh.com. If you go to /resources, some of the work we just talked through, or the exercise I just shared, is on my resources page. If you want to download, I have awesome workbooks, and then it will send you the prompts to the podcast that relates to that workbook. Like, it's really fun. And the podcast is called Your Badass Journey Podcast with me. So you can find that on any of the playable audio situations, platforms, and connect with me there, because that's the most fun way to dialogue as well.
It truly is. And especially if you are in a place right now in your business where you're focused on scaling and the mindset of scaling, Kareen is legit one of the most powerful women I know when it comes to strategy around that. So her podcast is full of so much gold.